Hi there, I'm Stuart Baker. I'm Managing Director of Maritime UK Solent. I'm here at Portsmouth International Port today with Mike Sellers, the Port Director. I'm going to talk about all things maritime here in the Solent, but also talk about Mike's new role as Chair of British Ports Association. So, Mike, welcome, and thanks ever so much for hosting us down here at your port.
Thanks, Stuart. Yeah, and great to welcome you here, and here at a good time because there's an awful lot going on here at the port.
Brilliant. If we kick off with that chairmanship of British Ports Association, I mean, I think the maritime sector is kind of well blessed with a whole range of bodies that support different aspects of it because the maritime sector is so big. So tell us a bit about the British Ports Association.
Yeah, so there are a number of trade bodies, as you say, that are represented within maritime in general. So you've kind of got your umbrella trade association, Maritime UK, and then below that, people like Chamber of Shipping, UK Major Ports Group, but there's also the British Ports Association, and the BPA represents around 86% of the UK ports activities. They are specific to UK ports, and so there is some crossover with UK Major Ports where they're the landowners, but they've got terminal operators who are members of the British Ports Association. So we do work very closely together. And I sat on the BPA Council, their board, when I first came here representing Portsmouth 6 years ago now. And thanks to my peers, I suppose, got nominated to be the deputy chairman. And the terms of reference bring the chairman in, deputy chair for 2 years, and then the chairman for 2 years. But the outgoing chairman had decided to retire. He was the chief exec of Harwich Haven, Neil Glendenning, and he decided to retire at the end of the last calendar year, which meant that kind of brought forward my role as the BPA chairman. So I'm actually there for 2.5 years rather than 2 years instead of the next AGM. But it's a great role, and I mean it's great for this region. But my role as the chair is to represent the ports industry in general.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the challenge, isn't it? To be that sort of objective person across the whole of the UK ports. And 86%, that's huge, isn't it? It's a really good coverage, really. And a lot going on in the sector at the moment, isn't there? So I guess it's a time of change and ambitions around sort of net zero, new methods of propulsion, and putting the infrastructure in place for that as well, and I suppose that's probably quite a keen topic for British Ports Association at the moment, really, and I suppose you have a role to influence government there as well, really.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, and I think you've hit the nail on the head, really, in terms of the future and net zero. I mean, that's major for ports and shipping in general. The next generation vessels and how we adapt as facilities for those. And I think you just got to look back at the last couple of years, how maritime in general has really sort of raised its or had its profile raised because of things like the pandemic and critical freight and all what's needed in order to carry on bringing in those medical supplies, the fresh produce and so on. I think that really has helped raise the profile, and then Brexit, which obviously has been quite an important thing to us because 70% of the trade here in Portsmouth is with the EU. So we knew trade was going to change, and I think again, all those, if you go back to all the risks around no deal Brexits, new trade deals, I think again that's kind of raised how important these borders are. 95% of the trade coming through UK ports has really sort of helped raise that profile for maritime in general. And yeah, you're right. The next stage now is about sustainability. It's about net zero, and again how we adapt to those changes in systems, changes in fuel, and changes in policy.
Yeah, and I suppose for those, because I guess all ports in the UK are in the same position. They're on that pathway to net zero. There's obligations from government, requirements from government, and kind of what's the what's the key challenges, perhaps the key blockers that all UK ports are kind of united? Say, you know, if there was one thing we could ask government to do, you know, what do you think would help them make the difference?
So, so for UK ports, I think you'll see the majority of the UK ports have really worked hard at what I'd call the low-hanging fruit. You know, the bits that are within their control to manage in terms of sustainability. So, you know, all UK ports are you know, very focused on looking at their investments and their developments land side and how you can bring sustainability into that. So again, just using Portsmouth as an example, we've really embraced solar, battery storage. You know, we're building a terminal that'll be 100% carbon neutral. But you know, that's not unusual within the UK ports. It's really the sort of ship to shore side that is going to be the big challenge going forward. There isn't one size that fits all in terms of that direction for shipping. You know, you've got new ships that are being built that are taking LNG as a fuel, which is great in terms of air quality, but it's not decarbonisation. You've then got ships that are capable of plugging in to shore power if you can provide shore power. And the big challenge for ports in terms of that shore power is not the port infrastructure, it's the infrastructure behind us. You know, when you've got a country that is really driving towards electric vehicles, battery charging, and has a pretty poor grid infrastructure, for me that is the big thing that ports need is for that infrastructure to be capable of taking what these ships are going to need.
So it's grid capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you know, we've got European ferries, Brittany ferries, one of our customers, but I know lots of the other ones that are crossing the Channel to France are being mandated by 2030 to plug into shore power across in the EU. But the UK ports are not going to be in that position to be able to provide that. You know, some of the grid infrastructure at some ports is not even going to be ready for the next 15 years. So you know, there's a huge challenge there, and it's not like plugging in a kettle. No. You know, you can't. When you plug these things in, they take. You know, cruise ships can take 10, 12 megawatts. Ferries are taking 7 or 8 megawatts. Right, okay. Portsmouth as an island takes about 30 megawatts. If we plugged in one of these,
it's huge, isn't
then
it?
we'd take out so much power in Portsmouth. So that is a huge challenge. And obviously it's encouraging that the government are starting to recognise that now and are starting to look at providing support for UK shipping, for ports to help with that investment to help in terms of that, you know, the shore power, shore side and sustainability. But that's not going to help everything. It's the infrastructure behind, the grid infrastructure that really needs that.
So I guess it's a whole systems approach, isn't it, really? And it's certainly not something that the ports can solve by themselves, actually. It kind of needs the government to play a key role in, making sure that grid infrastructure's there. And it becomes really expensive. And it's interesting what you say about, across the channel and what's being mandated in on the continent as well, because obviously ships they don't just go one way, do they? They need to go the other way. So whatever's happening there needs to be provision on this side as well, doesn't there? There's something that's equivalent. Really.
Yeah, and the last year there was the DFT had a call for evidence around shore power, and there were 10 UK ports. I mean, that gives you an idea of the ports that actually have end users that are looking to provide shore power. It's only 10 UK ports because, again, it's not one size that fits all. Yeah. A lot of shipping, is not going to go down the shore power route. They're probably going to move towards ammonia or hydrogen in the future. But 10 ports did provide that evidence around the shore power. And there has been talk about potentially mandating around that, similar to the EU. But that I just do not see that as being something that the government is capable of putting in place because of the whole challenges around the infrastructure.
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about sort of the things that ports can do, and you know, I'm kind of got a good, decent understanding of the things that you've been doing here. And so you're a municipal port. I think it's UK's largest municipal port, isn't it? And you've been doing some amazing things in terms of sustainability and really sort of pushing the boundaries. Do you want to tell us about what's been going on here at Portsmouth International Port?
Yeah, so we have really embraced solar and battery storage. So if you are going across the channel on the ferries, you'll drive through solar canopies before you check in, and you know that they will generate at least another megawatt of energy for us, and we're going to use the battery storage to help with our load, what we need for our load. Our buildings, we're building a passenger terminal extension for this year that will be operational this year. That will be a second departure point for ferries, or also it can be used for cruise turnarounds. That building will be 100% carbon neutral when it's finished, so it's it will have solar panels on the roof, battery storage, seawater pumps to heat. We've got underfloor heating. Even in the winter, it surprises me, but there is heat in that
Really?
in seawater, and there's technology there to turn that into heating. We've got insulation that is so thick, it's just unbelievable. It's not the kind of thing that you would normally put into a passenger terminal, but all of this is to ensure that it is 100% carbon neutral. So we're really excited about that in terms of the building. But
so really leading the way then, really.
yeah, absolutely. I think sustainability has been at the heart of this port in terms of our investments for quite a number of years now. So every time we look at our investments, we don't just look at the highest return on investment there. We look at what else we can put in there in terms of sustainability. So thinking about the future.
Yeah, and that's brilliant. And you were telling me about the sort of roof garden as well, and I love the idea of that, because I suppose ports often can be places that aren't seen as part of the community and infrastructure of town. But you were saying that anybody can come in and just see what's going on, and certainly in my job and in your job, we're very aware of the skills challenges and getting young people interested in this amazing maritime sector that we work in, and having an opportunity to come and see that they are exciting places. There's lots going on, lots to see. So that was phenomenal. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're really excited about this. We will have the way that the building is designed. We're going to have, connecting the two buildings, a roof terrace, roof garden, and that will have living walls that will cascade down from there. That is not within what we call the restricted area, which is very similar. Seaports very similar to airports, where you would have to go through security to get into those restricted areas. Where the building is and where the cafe is, where the garden, the Sky Garden is, members of the public can come in, grab a coffee and watch the ships coming and going. So
sounds great.
We are quite excited.
I'll bring my kids down.
They'd
absolutely love it.
We are quite excited, and going back to your question around maritime skills, and really starting to showcase what ports do.
Yeah.
Last year we opened our doors for the first time in terms of inviting members of the public into the port, other than those that were going out on holiday. And we got some really positive comments around that. We had about 1,000 people come on the day.
A lot of people.
Yeah, and it was all part of Maritime UK Week, and it was to really highlight what we did, the number of jobs, and the activities, and we got some really positive feedback. So we will be doing it again this year, and I've no doubt it'll end up being an annual event. But we were really encouraged by that. The same week, and I know it was all part of Maritime UK Week, we had 200 school children, local school children, come to the port, and that was terrifying. 200 school children coming to the port. Some of the questions, you just don't know what questions you're going to get from them, and they were around sort of 10, 11 years old. So they came. We had and invited people with varying different roles within the maritime sector, and we collaborated with the naval base. Wow. We did it with a number of the sort of maritime businesses around the port. We were lucky enough to have a cruise ship in. We had Viking in that day, and the number of speakers that talked about their roles, and then the pupils then got an opportunity to have a look around the port, but also the dockyard. They went to the historic dockyard as well, and Viking actually took some of them on board, which was highly unusual because they don't even let their crew's children on board because it is adult only. So I mean that was a real highlight for a lot of the school children to get on board and have a look. But again, you know, I think that was really positively received from the school. So we'll look to do something similar again.
And I guess it might have sort of struck a chord with, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4 kids who think, actually, that's a career for me. And I think that's the one thing. You speak to any business, no matter what sector, but in particular maritime, recruitment is a massive challenge. They're just not getting the talent pipeline, yet it's a growing sector. There is so much for them, rewarding careers. So I think the more that businesses such as Portsmouth International Port can open the door and say, come and take a look, come and see what's possible, come and see what's on your doorstep, come and see the kind of career you can have, it can be far more compelling than anything they'd probably get from a teacher at school, because it's the real world, you know. So I mean, well done.
The biggest surprise for me really is that logistics is not on the school curriculum.
Especially in an area like this.
Logistics is everything. So you're right. There is a real challenge in the perception of ports and the jobs, but you know, normally you name it, career-wise, you could be doing it working for a port. I do think that we have to adapt to the new norm as well, post-pandemic. I mean, there's things that, you know, you've got to do at work. We've got, you know, you can't tie a ship up from working from home. You have to be here at the port. But there are some skilled jobs that cross sectors that we need to. We're quite an old-fashioned industry, and we need to adapt in order to attract those key skills.
And I guess, you know, COVID, obviously, you know, the pandemic, very challenging for lots of people on lots of levels, but actually there are some lessons, as you say, that have almost accelerated change and adoption of new technologies. And I think that's one of the sort of positives, if you can say that, really, that I think all sectors have to embrace. Solent Freeport, massive opportunity for the area. I get asked about it everywhere I go, and there's so much interest, and with Solent being the first designated in the UK, a massive coup for the area. And Portsmouth International Port is very much part of that journey that we've been on, which seems like forever. But we're there now. We've crossed the line, we're designated, it's in legislation, so it's over to that operational phase. Tell us about Portsmouth International Port's role in Solent Freeport and what your ambitions are for the future as a result of Freeport status.
Portsmouth International Port is a customs zone. And within that customs zone, Portico Shipping are the customs zone operator, and that's our role within overall the overall Freeport itself. What that means is we have systems in place whereby HMRC are able to track those raw materials or those goods that are coming through the port. We have the ability to store those goods beyond the normal period before anybody would pay duty on those goods. Simplifies the whole customs arrangements, particularly if it's linked in with the tax sites. Free ports are not a new thing. Free ports have been around the world for quite a number of years. The sort of traditional free port that I was used to in the time that I've worked in the ports industry, it's tended to be your port boundary, your customs zone, and your tax zone, all within the same area. Yeah. So those raw materials would come in. This would stimulate manufacturing. Goods would get manufactured. They'd then be exported from that port, and it didn't actually leave that zone itself. I think what is quite unique and really interesting about the Solent Freeport is you've got 3 huge tax sites that are around the region, one in Southampton, one in Eastleigh, and one up at Dunsbury Park in Havant, and they're the ones that are really going to stimulate and create jobs and the wealth and the increase in the economy around the Solent itself. And the port's really just those enablers around traceability and tracking and the imports and the exports of those goods. I think it's a great example of how we've collaborated as a region. I think the Solent in particular should not necessarily be seen as lots of individual ports or different areas. For me, I've worked up on the Humber, which is a large body of water with lots of tonnages that go through. You see it in Europe at places like Antwerp, for example, where there's lots of terminal operators around a body of water. That's exactly what the Solent is. Yeah. I think it's probably one of the first examples, certainly since I've been here, that I've seen where all of us got together. We saw the benefit of putting forward a business case for the Freeport, and that collaboration has resulted in an operational Freeport.
Absolutely, I think you're right. It's that collaboration, isn't it? I mean, what could be sort of, and probably are, let's face it, competing entities on different trades, but have actually come together because they've seen the collective benefit in one bid from the area rather than a number of bids that government think, well, we can't give you lots, of free ports, but if we can give you one. And it's come together and it's worked. And I suppose that, where you talk about Antwerp and having lots of operators, around a waterway, it's pretty obvious actually. I've never really thought about it that way before. It's almost like a Solent basin, isn't it,
yes,
really, where you've got these different activities happening, and obviously the naval base, behind us here as well, another significant activity. But yeah, and it's been great. And you say those, the opportunity that comes from it, 16,000 jobs in this new area. I mean, that's great for the young people and those looking to retrain, which is fantastic. And that increase in gross value added to the output area by about £1 billion. So that's significant. And really exciting for our. We've been really, as Maritime UK Solent and as Solent Local Enterprise Partner, we've been really pleased to be part of it. But I think it's over to you guys now to do the real hard stuff really and make it work, isn't it? Really, with that operational phase.
But as soon as the announcement came out of the Freeport being operational, I mean, I know just from the linking that we have with Dunsbury Park. Yeah. The additionality you talk about, the extra GDP. And the jobs, it has stimulated so many inquiries already. Brilliant. Yeah. So, I think there's a massive opportunity for this region now, now that we're a Freeport.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's great to hear, and I think there has been that uptick of interest. And I think that's one of the things about Freeports. It's saying, it's looking at those areas of the country which often tend to be sort of those coastal communities, a little bit left behind. We hear a lot about levelling up and in need of investment to almost intervene because the market hasn't quite worked. And it's great to see that government policy is doing exactly that. It's stimulating interest that wasn't there before. And let's hope we attract some of that internationally mobile investment into this region, whether it's in Southampton, whether it's in Portsmouth, it doesn't matter, into this region, and provide jobs to everybody across the region, Isle of Wight as well, of course, which is good. So I mean, it's a great thing for the region, and I suppose that sort of circles us back a bit, because one of the ambitions I know for Solent Freeport is to sort of deliver on some of those net zero ambitions as well, and I think that's as we said before, Portsmouth's kind of at the vanguard of that already, so we're able to demonstrate in those areas. So about a year ago, I think you published your new port master plan with ambitious and exciting plans for the future. How's that going? 1 year on? It's
going well in general. The world's in a different place to where it was a year ago, which is having some impacts on trade. The master plan, it's good practice for ports of our size to have a 20-year master plan, and Portsmouth hadn't had one since 2006, so it was due a refresh. And with everything that was happening in terms of changes to trade, the EU, the end of the EU transition, and also sustainability, some of the things that are going to be happening in the future, it was important that we had a framework that we could start to work to focus on the port development for the future. So last year that was unanimously approved by Portsmouth City Council members, and we really have sort of started those developments at pace. One of them was the terminal extension, and that will be ready this year and operational this year. The drive towards net zero, all the things that we've been doing with solar, with battery storage. We've now secured enough power to our gate, or we will have enough power to our gate by 2025, that takes us towards the next stage, towards shore power for Brittany's new ferries, the hybrid ferries. We found a niche in the sort of high-end boutique cruising, and we're very focused, being a council-owned port, we're very focused around transit calls and tourism and bringing people into the city. That has really started, we're starting to see that trend develop considerably. I think the one thing that we have had to revisit is around the land options. Okay. So the master plan itself identified that because being a cross-channel port, the driver accompanied freight was going to change towards a percentage of unaccompanied freight. Okay. So driver accompanied is where the driver will travel on the ferry across to France or Spain, but it was expected that some of that wasn't just in time or as time sensitive would switch towards unaccompanied trailers where they're dropped off at the ports, loaded by the stevedores, and then picked up by a haulier across in France or in Spain, or containers, trailers or containers. And there was going to be a need for more land, because obviously you need to park these things ahead of the ships arriving. Now, we did identify some land that was between here and Eastleigh along that M27 corridor. But when we started to delve into it in a bit more detail, it would have been far smaller than we expected as an operational storage area. But also, once you go outside of a certain radius, it starts to get too expensive to move freight between the two areas. So what we're doing now is we've employed a consultant to look at how we can change the overall layout of the ports, because the port's expanded over the years and years, and that may not necessarily be the most efficient way that we need to operate now. So how we actually store our freight and maximise that, and the initial findings of that is that with some changes internally, we could create another 100 parking spaces for trailers. That would be our phase one, and phase two would be to go upwards. Basically look at multi-decking for freight, which is for trailers, which would be a first for the UK if we actually do that. It's not quite as simple as car multi-decking, but it probably would be more expensive from a capex perspective, but certainly a lot better from an opex perspective to do it within the port. So I would say we're progressing where we wanted to go, and we're seeing that trend change. Obviously, things like the war in Ukraine, cost of living crisis, cost of raw materials, that started to have some impact on where we would have liked to have been. But we've still got that ambition. We've still got the support of the council, and we'll continue with the master plan.
That sounds really good progress, actually. And as you say, it's a dynamic environment, isn't it? Lots of change, and change we could never have foreseen 12 months ago, really. Fantastic. You mentioned in there Brexit, EU transition, whatever we call it. It seems like a lifetime ago now, doesn't it, really? But I guess that's had changes for the port as well. I think you've got a border control post here. Tell us about that.
It's been quite an interesting challenge. Has that EU transition. When I first started dealing with this, I actually had hair, and I've been pulling that out ever since.
Right. Okay.
We've built. If you kind of rewind to 2020, as we were coming towards the end of EU transition, the government announced something called a border operating model.
Right.
And the border operating model was all about how the UK would deal with EU imports. So this wasn't about exports. This is about the imports. So how we deal with it at ports and airports. And this was everything from customs arrangements to security declarations to immigration, and also to animal and plant health and welfare. And ports such as Portsmouth, because we're a cross-channel port, you name it, food product-wise, it comes across here. We're required to build these border control posts. Now, what the government did is they put forward a port infrastructure grant fund, which effectively funded 2/3 of the infrastructure costs. The other third had to be paid for by the port and by the airport. So this border control post, ours, I think, is probably about the third biggest in the country because of the products that's coming up. It takes up about 2 acres of operational land. We were just about ready for the deadline of July last year. And then in April, the government announced that because of the cost of living crisis, they were going to pause those border controls. Now, the reason behind that is all ports, such as ours, the difference that they had to put in, they would borrow, and then they would effectively charge an EU import charge for those goods coming through, which would have made it through to the supermarkets and would have increased the price of the goods that people were buying.
Right.
So there was logic to pausing that, but at the same time, rather than just pause it for a period of time, the government have now decided to review the whole import controls, but not just for EU, but for non-EU as well. And that's something called the target operating model, and that, in principle, what the government's aim is for an importer to put in the goods that he's bringing in, or she's bringing into the country, on one platform that would then send out the information to DEFRA, to the different government departments, and then they would then target the high risk products to inspect at the ports. Right. So it would minimise and bring down the amount of inspections that would be carried out at the ports, because everything's traceable now. Yeah. So it was really just to carry that out. Now we're really waiting on that consultation with the government as to what impact that will have on the port. In the meantime, that building is empty. Yeah. And being a local authority port, the big challenge that Portsmouth City Council have around that building is they couldn't use borrowing for that difference because there's no way of getting your return and paying back the loan. So they've had to fund that from their central pot, which is having a huge challenge to the overall council budget. That was 5.4 million from the council's budget that's had to go into that border control post.
Tough time.
It is, yeah. It's very challenging.
Yeah. And what's the timeline on the consultation?
Who knows? That was supposed to be October last year, then November. It keeps changing, and unfortunately, because of the fairly constant changes at ministerial level,
fairly turbulent.
We really need that bit of stability and a minister that will almost get a grip of this and then start the engagement with the port. So we're really waiting for that engagement.
Well, I mean, I guess we'd relative to recent history, we seem to be in a fairly calm political period. Yeah. So let's hope that maintains for a while and that can be resolved for the better. Because as you say, you've talked about your space challenges here, and yet there's potentially 2 acres there.
That's right, exactly.
Underutilised, which is no good for anybody, is there really? No. So that's good. Thank you ever so much for sponsoring the Innovation Award at our inaugural Maritime UK Solent Awards last year. Doesn't seem that long ago, but it was October now, and we were thrilled actually, and it was great to have Portsmouth International Port on board as one of the sponsors. Thrilling for us, and it was great that you sponsored that award because you actually are pushing the boundaries. We've heard about that already, but actually you've been doing some sort of smaller level sort of projects with in collaboration, really sort of at those early stages of innovation. Can you tell us about those?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of sponsoring the award, it was a great event, and I think it's great to celebrate what is fantastic about this region. I mean, the Solent region is just fantastic, leading the way in so many areas. So we were keen to be a sponsor, and innovation certainly was one that stood out for us because. We're starting to get a reputation of being a living laboratory for SMEs and for the universities. We're working very close, collaborating with Portsmouth University with a number of SMEs on projects. Some of them have been around clean maritime demonstrations. One of them was hydrogen. Was a small scale hydrogen project that looked at hydrogen electrolyzer, how it could utilise that green hydrogen into a possible outboard motor for a rib, and we supplied the rib for that, and that's just recently been tested. Couldn't be on the harbour, unfortunately. MCA wouldn't allow that, but it's been tested out in a pool somewhere, and it works. So that's great. And it's the sort of thing that could start to be scaled up, and hydrogen is going to be important for the future. The other one is battery storage. We're convinced that for the amount of power that we're going to need, shoreside power, we're going to have to store some power as well. Yeah. So we've worked on a small scale battery storage project that's it's got artificial intelligence. It's reading the port's electricity usage. It's taking the power from solar, and it's charging up our electric vehicles that we use around the port. So really good, really innovative projects, and we're quite happy to collaborate with SMEs around that, because I know they really do want that space at ports to be able to do it. So the DFT like us and the connected catapults like us as one of the collaborators. So we've been quite heavily involved.
And it's great to hear that you're able to provide that kind of test bed. And I love that term, living laboratory as well. I mean, it kind of just tells you exactly what it is, doesn't it? It brings this sort of image, isn't it? And I think the Solent has got this kind of tradition and real vibrant, innovative ecosystem, but actually doesn't always come together. But I think that collaboration that you've talked about across those two projects, and that spirit of actually working together, particularly with the SMEs who can find it challenging to find that space to test something, is great to hear, because it just shows that Portsmouth International Port is very much part of its economy and part of its community. Which is fantastic.
Yeah, and I think the Solent cluster as well. The introduction of the Solent cluster. I think that is going to be another way of networking and collaborating and meeting a lot of the innovators. I mean, you need those innovators to move to the next stage. Really,
you absolutely do. And I think we're quite lucky on that Solent cluster with we've got that big asset of the ExxonMobil refinery here. And they're pushing hydrogen strongly, which is great for us, because particularly with hydrogen being a potential maritime fuel of the future, with our ports, it's great to potentially have that being supplied at some point in the future on our doorstep. And as you say, I think having that's a community approach, really. It fosters that innovation, doesn't it? And it's those conversations that can happen that you may not even know are going to happen, but actually then there's that bit of spark of innovation where things come together, and hopefully new jobs, new growth, new value happens for the future, which makes this economy stronger, which is good for everybody.
Indeed.
Mike, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, as ever. Thanks ever so much for hosting us down here. It's been great to hear everything that's going on about Portsmouth International Port, really pushing the boundaries of innovation, and congratulations again on being chairman of British Ports Association. A real coup for you and the area, I think, as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Stuart. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure.
Brilliant. And thanks ever so much for tuning in and watching this podcast. We've done others. Please have a look at those. Also, we'll be doing more in the future. If there's bits you like, if there's bits you don't like as well, write your comments below, and we'll take them all on board. But thanks ever so much.